Welcome to my story of one of the most famous and terrifying hauntings in modern British history, the Battersea Poltergeist. This case is often called the UK's most well-documented and unexplained poltergeist activity. It's baffled paranormal investigators, skeptics, and the general public for decades. In this video, I'll take you on a journey and a deep dive into the strange and the unsettling events that took place in a quiet suburban home at 63 Wycliffe Road, Battersea, between 1956 and 1968. We'll explore the eerie phenomena reported by the Hitchens family, the role of the teenage daughter Shirley, and the tireless efforts of a ghost hunter, Harold Chibbett. But I'm more than just retelling the events. I'll analyse the Battersea Poltergeist through the lens of paranormal studies, psychological theories, and of course, the meticulous investigation presented in Danny Robbins' hit podcast, The Battersea Poltergeist, as well as some of his later work with the Uncanny podcast and the Uncanny TV series. So strap in, because this is not just a story about things that go bump in the night. This is a story about belief and fear, and some profound mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Maybe. So the story begins in 1956 in an ordinary terraced house in Battersea, South London. The Hitchens family, consisting of Wally and Kitty Hitchens, their teenage daughter Shirley, and Wally's elderly mother Ethel, lived a quiet, modest life. But that life would be shattered in January of that year when they experienced the first signs of what would become a prolonged paranormal disturbance. On a cold January night, the family heard loud bangs echoing through the house. First, they just dismissed it as the creaks and groans of an old building, or perhaps even mischievous neighbours. But the noises persisted, and they became louder and more disruptive. Objects began to move on their own. Furniture was shifted. Pots and pans were thrown from shelves, and strange scratching sounds that could be heard behind the walls. And soon, the disturbances seemed to centre on a 15-year-old Shirley. Things including her bed shaking violently in the middle of the night and her belongings being mysteriously scattered across the room. As is common in poltergeist cases, the activity seemed to grow more intense over time, escalating from mere noises to aggressive actions. Knocks on the walls turned to disembodied voices. The air would feel thick with an eerie presence, especially around Shirley. Despite the strange occurrences, the Hitchens family was reluctant to call for outside help. At first, they just hoped the disturbances would simply stop on their own, but they didn't. And as the months went on, the family found themselves at the centre of something inexplicable. It was at this point that Harold Chibbett, a paranormal researcher with a keen interest in ghost stories, was drawn to the case. Chibbett was a meticulous investigator, and he believed in approaching paranormal claims with skepticism and scientific rigour. He began to visit the house regularly, documenting the strange occurrences with precise detail, and what he found was deeply disturbing. Chibbett's involvement, along with the family's mounting desperation, kind of drew attention from the media, and soon the Battersea Poltergeist became a national sensation. But what exactly was happening inside 63 Wycliffe Road? Was it truly the work of a poltergeist, as many did believe? Or was this something more complex, something rooted in the minds of the people involved as opposed to a spirit? One of the most fascinating aspects of the Battersea Poltergeist for me was the emergence of a name the poltergeist seemingly gave itself: Donald. Over time, the entity began to communicate with the family in strange and unsettling ways. It would rap on walls in response to questions, even going as far as to leave written notes for the family. These notes, often in crude handwriting, were found scattered around the house, often addressed to Shirley. But who or what was Donald? Was this a playful spirit, as it sometimes seemed? Or was there something darker behind the name? And I'm going to draw your attention to something that was said in the Battersea Poltergeist by Danny Robbins. Shirley says, "I don't think Donald is a demon. I think he's just misunderstood." The entity often displayed what can only be described as personality. A mischievous one, yes, but also occasionally it was violent and sinister. Shirley, who was frequently the target of the activity, seemed to develop an odd relationship with the spirit, on one hand being terrified of the phenomena. On the other hand, she often spoke of Donald as though he were real, but just a troublesome real person. In the Battersea Poltergeist podcast, Danny Robbins dives deeply into this relationship, examining how the entity's presence affected Shirley's teenage years. What's striking about this case is the emotional toll it took on her, something often overlooked in traditional paranormal accounts. You see, for Shirley, these were her formative years, and she lived them in the shadow of something she could never explain, and she could never escape. Was Donald a figment of Shirley's repressed emotions, a psychic projection of the turmoil that she faced in her adolescence? And this brings us to one of the key theories that is often applied to poltergeist cases. The notion that poltergeists are not external spirits at all, but rather manifestations of an unconscious psychic energy, usually centered on the young person undergoing emotional or psychological stress. Could Shirley's troubled teenage years have created Donald in a sense, or was she genuinely haunted by an unseen force? Because I find a troubled teenager being able to move objects with her mind far more scary, as I said with the Enfield poltergeist. So the term poltergeist comes from the German words poltern, meaning knock or rattle, and Geist meaning spirit or ghost. Poltergeist activity is often characterised by physical disturbances, objects moving, sounds being heard, and so on. But what sets these cases apart from traditional hauntings is their close association with a human agent, often a child or a teenager. One of the most enduring theories in paranormal studies is that poltergeist phenomena are not caused by spirits, but unconscious psychokinetic energy. Essentially, some researchers believe that the human mind, when under extreme stress, can cause physical objects to move without direct contact. This theory, it would explain why poltergeist activity often centers around young people. The emotional turmoil of adolescence. Puberty. In the case of Shirley Hitchens, this theory seems plausible. At the time the disturbances began, Shirley was 15. You could say it was a prime age for such phenomena. According to poltergeist researchers, she was also dealing with a difficult home life. Her family were financially struggling, and she was often lonely. Could her emotional state have triggered the poltergeist activity? And interestingly, Danny Robbins explores this idea in his podcast Uncanny, where he revisits not only the Battersea case, but also other famous paranormal stories. And in doing so, he draws parallels between the cases, suggesting that perhaps what we call ghosts or poltergeists may have been more to do with the living than the dead. Chibbett's investigations were meticulous, but despite his best efforts, he could never definitively prove the existence of Donald or any other supernatural force. Over the years, numerous theories were proposed to explain the disturbances, some believing it was an elaborate hoax orchestrated by Shirley or someone else in the family. Others speculate that the Hitchens family were targeted by malevolent forces, perhaps even demonic in nature, something that I'm not a believer or subscriber to. During his investigations, Chibbett consulted mediums, psychics, and other paranormal experts, all of who offered different opinions on the natures of the haunting, but none could provide a conclusive answer. The disturbances, they would come and go unpredictably, with periods of calm followed by intense activity, and always the activity seemed to centre on Shirley. In the Battersea Poltergeist, Danny Robbins re-examines these investigations in great detail, interviewing Shirley herself, and she was in her 80s at the time, as well as paranormal experts, historians, and skeptics. What's striking about the podcast is how it balances the supernatural with the psychological, asking listeners to consider multiple explanations for the phenomena. This podcast itself hooking me back into the paranormal world. Robbins also digs into archives, uncovering Chibbett's original notes and the recordings. These documents, long thought lost, provide a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a man who was both a believer and a skeptic. Someone who was desperate to find answers, but unwilling to jump to conclusions. The Battersea Poltergeist case officially ended in 1968 after more than a decade of sporadic activity, one of the longest recorded cases of poltergeist activity. By this point, Shirley had grown up, moved out, and had started a family of her own. the disturbances gradually faded away, leaving the Hitchens family to pick up the pieces of their broken, shattered lives. But for those involved, the haunting, it never truly ended. Shirley still speaks of Donald with a mixture of fear and curiosity, and the case continues to haunt the imaginations of paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike. In the years since the haunting ended, numerous books, articles and documentaries have been produced about the case. And with the release of the Battersea Poltergeist podcast, the story has found a new generation of listeners because I'd never heard of this case. But despite all of this attention, the case remains unsolved. The mystery remains unsolved. Was Donald a spirit, or was he a figment of Shirley's imagination, or something else entirely? So as we come to the end of our journey into the Battersea Poltergeist on this channel, it's crucial to explore the divide that continues to separate believers in the paranormal from skeptics, and I sit in the middle. This case is much like the infamous Enfield Poltergeist and the chilling events of 30 East Drive, somewhere I've investigated a few times. It presents compelling arguments for both sides, and by examining these parallels we can better understand how complex, layered, and ultimately how inconclusive these cases are. So let's look at the believer's perspective. So, evidence of the supernatural for believers. The Battersea Poltergeist is a clear example of supernatural phenomena. The sheer volume of eyewitness testimony, the duration of the haunting spanning over a decade, and the involvement of a respected paranormal investigator like Harold Chibbett, and him providing what believers view as strong evidence of an unseen force at play. Consider the most telling aspects of the case. Physical disturbances, furniture moved on its own, objects were thrown across the room, strange knocking sounds echoing through the house, to the point where the neighbours could hear it, a few doors down. These are hallmarks of a classic poltergeist activity, and it mirrors what we saw at the Enfield Poltergeist in 1977. In both cases, the events often happened in front of multiple witnesses, lending credibility to the claims that they were not simply tricks or figments of a child's imagination. The Donald entity's supposed ability to write notes, answer questions through knocking, tapping or raps, and even engage with Shirley on a personal level suggests that this was not just random chaos, but the actions of an intelligent force. While similar communication occurred at 30 East Drive, the personality of Donald in the Battersea case, it seemed more defined, almost as if he had a purpose. Believers argued that this communication, especially over such a prolonged period, rules out the idea of a simple hoax. Much like Janet Hodgson in the Enfield Poltergeist case, Shirley Hitchens was the centre for this haunting. For believers, this is more than just coincidence. They will point to the idea that adolescent girls are often at the heart of poltergeist activity, possibly because they have heightened psychic sensitivities. In both cases, the girls were subjected to emotional and physical stress, and in the eyes of a believer, that could have made them more susceptible to supernatural forces. Battersea Poltergeist also fits into a broader narrative of the poltergeist cases throughout history, from the Bell Witch of the 19th century to 30 East Drive in the 1960s. These cases share strikingly similar patterns. A central human agent, often a young girl, unexplained physical disturbances, and communication with an unseen entity. Believers will argue that these reoccurring elements across different cultures and at different time periods make it unlikely that these cases are mere fabrications. We have to look at the skeptical argument too, psychological and natural explanations. You see, on the other hand, skeptics see the Battersea Poltergeist as yet another case of misinterpreted events, heightened emotions and perhaps deliberate trickery. To them, the parallels between Battersea, Enfield and 30 East Drive actually weaken the argument for the paranormal, as they believe the cases share not supernatural origins, but common psychological and environmental factors. Did somebody read the Battersea Poltergeist and have that happen at 30 East Drive and in turn Enfield? The role of suggestibility and mass hysteria. Skeptics will point out that once the Hitchens family believed they were haunted, their perceptions of what were ordinary events might have changed. The knocks, the bangs and the movement could have been explained by natural causes like subsidence, plumbing issues, or vibrations from nearby trains, and some have suggested the same for Enfield. Mass hysteria is another explanation. Once one person reports seeing or hearing something strange, others in close proximity can begin to believe and report the same, even though it's subconsciously happening to them. We also have to look at teenage rebellion and attention seeking. Shirley Hitchens was 15 when the disturbances began. It's a critical age of emotional and psychological upheaval. Skeptics will often argue that poltergeist cases centering on teenagers could be explained by repressed emotions manifesting in some sort of bizarre behaviour. The same accusations were levelled at Janet Hodgson. I've thrown the same accusations at that case, the Enfield poltergeist, whereas critics will suggest that she faked some of the paranormal activity events to gain attention. In the case of 30 East Drive, skeptics also argued the family, particularly the daughter Diane, may have been involved in exaggerating the events to move house because they didn't like the council house. Or there's the hoax theory. One or more of the compelling arguments made by skeptics is the possibility of a deliberate hoax. Could Shirley, knowingly or unknowingly, have been responsible for the disturbances? Poltergeist cases are rife with instances where the human agent was caught faking phenomena. In the Enfield case, Janet Hodgson admitted to fabricating some of the evidence, like bending the spoons, throwing things around and making bangings and being caught, although she did claim that most of the events were genuine. Skeptics will wonder if Shirley would have done the same things, either out of a desire for attention or due to subconscious psychological stresses. And perhaps the most out there and intriguing skeptical theory is the idea of unconscious psychokinetic energy, and that's been popularised by parapsychologists like Dr. William G. Roll. His theory suggests that poltergeist activity may not be caused by spirits, but by the human mind itself. Shirley, like Janet in the Enfield case, could have unconsciously projected psychic energy, causing objects to move and for noises to occur. This explanation bridges the gap between pure skepticism and belief in something beyond the physical world. But it's pretty controversial, even within paranormal research. We're treading on superhero powers here. So Battersea, Enfield, 30 East Drive. Let's compare them. When you compare the Battersea Poltergeist case with the more well-known Enfield Poltergeist and the haunting of 30 East Drive, several striking similarities and differences will emerge. One major difference is the duration of the phenomena. Battersea's disturbances lasted for over a decade, while the Enfield just spanned 2 years, from 1977 to 1979. And 30 East Drive only lasted a few months in 1966. Okay, there are sporadic reports afterward with investigators and the like, but the longevity of the Battersea case lends credence to the believers, as hoaxes are difficult to sustain for such a long period. However, a skeptic could argue that the prolonged case allowed for more time for the psychological influences to be built. Both the Enfield and the 30 East Drive hauntings attracted media attention relatively quickly, which could have influenced the course of those events. And the Battersea case, while eventually covered by the media, had years of relative quiet before becoming a sensation. This lack of immediate media scrutiny may suggest that the Hitchens family wasn't seeking fame, and it bolsters the argument that they genuinely believed that something paranormal was happening to them. But skeptics could argue that the media still played a role, possibly escalating the family's belief in the haunting. And what about the psychological toll on the human? All three cases focus on a central human figure, usually a young girl whose life is deeply affected by these disturbances. In Battersea, Shirley grew up under the shadow of the poltergeist, while Janet Hodgson in Enfield became a media sensation, and Diane at 30 East Drive similarly found herself at the heart of the haunting. The emotional impact of these individuals, it can't be overstated, and as a skeptic, you'd point to this as the evidence of how the psychological stress can manifest in poltergeist cases. So where does this leave us? The Battersea Poltergeist, much like Enfield and the 30 East Drive phenomena, is like a Rorschach test for our beliefs of the supernatural. For some, it's undeniable evidence of forces way beyond our understanding. And for others, it's an elaborate psychological or even physical misinterpretation of everyday occurrences. And in the end, the truth may lie somewhere in between. Paranormal events like these resist tidy explanations. For believers, the evidence is compelling. Eyewitnesses, physical disturbances, and an intelligent entity communicating with the living. But for skeptics, the evidence is circumstantial at best, the result of human psychology and the strange ways in which our minds can trick us into seeing patterns where none exist. And as Danny Robbins himself says in the Battersea Poltergeist, the haunting at 63 Wycliffe Road is as much about the people involved as it is about the phenomena itself. It's a story of belief and doubt, of fear and curiosity, and the lengths we go to when confronted with the unexplained. Now, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, one thing is certain. The Battersea Poltergeist left a haunted legacy, one that still continues to captivate and mystify those who dare delve into the unknown. Now, I've made videos like this before, but I haven't been able to find as many still images or pieces of video that I would be able to overlay in my video, because this is the 50s. This wasn't recorded on video cameras. So I've had to use a few still images, but mostly it's just me talking to you guys, the viewer, and a lot of people have been enjoying my sort of spooky tales and things like that, because I come from a very skeptical mind, but I'm also a believer. Genuinely, I'm interested in your thoughts on the Battersea Poltergeist in the comment section down below. It's criminal that I didn't hear of the Battersea Poltergeist until the podcast. I'd never heard of it. I'd heard of Borley Rectory, I'd heard of 30 East Drive, I'd heard of Enfield, but Battersea just seemed to disappear from time for a while. And the skeptic in me looks and says, if this was the first one, surely Enfield, which isn't that far away, just copied it. And in between, there was 30 East Drive. Did 30 East Drive copy it? I keep investigating 30 East Drive, but I'm not experiencing the poltergeist. I'm experiencing little things here and there that I don't other places, but where's the poltergeist? Where's the Black Monk of Pontefract? And that isn't to say that I truly discount everything in these stories. That's why I keep returning to 30 East Drive, because it's the only one of these places that we can still visit. And yes, you have to pay to go there. But I would rather never turn down an opportunity to go there and never capture a thing than say, I'm not going there, I don't believe it's haunted. Only for somebody that I would have been working with to capture something that I would look at and say, that could be fake. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Much love to you all. Beardo out.